songs?
What's wrong with you people?
But
You just naturally have incredibly high level.
You run in with it.
Master Exploder by
Yes, I wish that every time I walked into a room to teach that AC/DC's Back in Black was right. That would be awesome.
Soundtrack material.
Okay, should we talk more about the Sister Sisters?
Yes. I can talk for 3 hours about it.
This is an effort for me. For next time, what we'll do is, so I realized this in reading the Visecker, it's like, there's very little about Kenneth Burke in that chapter, as it turns out, right? Which is, it's all sort of setting up what she's going to do with Kenneth Burke. Which is fine, because one of the things that it does, introductions do there, is allow you to situate what different arguments are happening in the field and what different positions are going on vis-a-vis social theory in that case, where you have sort of Althusser being posited against Gramsci. So it's like, okay, you get some sense of the contours of what the problematics of contemporary rhetorical theory are. So I still think it's entirely useful, even though it doesn't say really very much about Kenneth Burke in particular. But so what I'd instead like to do is, so for next week we'll do Victor's Negation, Subjectivity, and the History of Rhetoric. I will assign the first chapter of that. We will do Brad Vivian's Being Made Strange. We'll do the first, I think it's chapter 2, I'll let you know, of that. Michelle Valif was kind enough to send me an essay that she just finished writing and is going to be published shortly. So that's a standalone thing, so that'll be fine. And maybe we should do one other thing.
Is that the zombie one?
That's the zombie one. And I might put the chapter from Dilip Gankar's, that would also be a standalone essay. What I would like for you to do then is, the standalone essays are essays, just read them, whatever. But the ones where I assign you the introduction, like read the introduction, and then if you are interested, read another chapter, right? Like, so for instance, obviously, I mean, I found myself, when I read the introduction, of course I just read it last night, but I was like, well, I want to go read the Habermas chapter now, because I want to see how, you know, what she sees as the anti-Habermas payoff of her reading of Burke. So, like, you know, go do that. Go read the additional content chapters, because the intros, you know, like I said, they're functional in terms of situating rhetorical theory, but in terms of actually making and doing any of the analysis, I think they're perhaps not as useful. I'd anticipated. So I'd imagine there being a coherent theme on a weekly basis in terms of styles of thinking, and Matanza and Balef, that makes sense. Vivian sort of makes sense. That's gone. So it's just, now it's going to be like theory cornucopia is the topic for each week. Just like grab bag of different theory shit that people who are coming to the conference with. Let's start with, actually, this actually worked out quite well. Like after doing the metaphor stuff with Derrida last week and then reading Kenneth Burke basically articulating exactly the version of metaphor that Derrida was responding to, and then obviously Nietzsche's. I mean, I didn't plan this to cohere as well as it did. So today was also a grab bag, quote unquote. It just feels like an organized grab bag. So I figured we will we'll start with Nietzsche, and then hop into the Burke. We all did the right reading this week. Apparently like half of you guys read the Burke for last week, so hopefully you did a little bit of a refresher and also struggled your way through Nietzsche. So, I mean, I just want to read the first paragraph because I think it's a, you know, interesting way to start a philosophical essay. Once upon a time, some out-of-the-way corner of that universe which is dispersed into numberless twinkling solar systems, there was a star upon which clever beasts invented knowing. That was the most arrogant and mendacious minute of world history, but nevertheless it was only a minute. After nature had drawn a few breaths, the star cooled and congealed, and the clever beast had to die. The clever beast had to die, I guess, is really what just gets it for me. It's just like, I think that's hilarious. Am I the only one? Okay. What's going on? What's going on? Why start? It's a weird way to start a philosophy essay, isn't it? Sitting back down, leave me alone. Why start like that? What's that do?
One thing is it changes the perspective from one of human-centered to cosmic-centered.
Yeah, I mean, that's the big move is now we're looking from outside of a human perspective at the human perspective, right? Like, oh, we're an organism. Shit. which means that we die as a species, because that's what species do. No, it's really going to be totally different for humans, I swear. Okay, so that's generally, it's a perspectival shift, which we'll talk about in terms of Burke's terministic screens. And by the way, Burke, particularly in the symbolic action stuff, which is sort of later stuff for him, but also one of his early books, very much saw himself as Nietzschean, and articulating a kind of Marxist Nietzschean line in his work. So overlaps that you might notice between them are not simply accidental. This is before Nietzsche was cool. This is back when he was fascist. I guess fascist. He was fascist before fascism was cool, is really maybe the appropriate way of saying it.
Before fascism was fascism.
And yeah, I mean, we're clever beasts who invented knowing, but knowing has no function other than, I mean, it is very much an undoing of that dichotomy between humans and animals, because what is the function of knowledge? What does it really do, according to Nietzsche? No, it doesn't do jack.
It separates you from reality.
It's an indication of a separation from reality. But look at it. On the. I don't have page numbers. On page 80. As a means for preserving the individual, the intellect unfolds its principal powers in dissimulation, which is the means by which weaker, less robust individuals preserve themselves, since they've been denied the chance to wage the battle for existence with horns and the sharp teeth of the beasts of prey. What does that say?
Hide from things.
It's a survival tool. That's all it is, right? And it's a pretty sucky one, right? We didn't get wings or fangs or claws. We got reason. Right? Reason is the means by which the weaker species maintains itself in existence. Because if we didn't have this, we'd have been done a long time ago. In other words, knowledge, truth, these things have purely instrumental survival value for a particular type of species, and no value beyond that. We want to imagine that we are finding out the truths of the world, that we are getting behind the appearances of things to know how things really are. And Nietzsche's initial claim is, no. The only function that this serves is a survival function for a particular kind of species. In fact, I mean, one of the points that he makes is like the very pride that we have in rationality as a distinguishing mark. That's always a sign of deception, right? What an excess amount of pride means that you're deceiving yourself about something, right? So we are constituted by this deception, and this is the truth that lies. So the question for someone like Nietzsche becomes, given that we're so inclined towards deception and fooling ourselves and lying to ourselves, for instance, how many people here like watching movies? How many people like reading stories, fiction? You know they're not true, right? In other words, you like being lied to. You actually do. You pay money to have people lie to you in certain types of ways, right? And so Nietzsche's like, how is it that this species that is constituted by dissimulation and deception could ever come to want something like truth? That's the crazy question, right? How did it ever happen that this self-deceptive, enjoying lying animal started caring about truth? You would think it would just be like us. Let's go self-deception. Like, that's what we do. And it has a lot to do with the formation of words. How are words formed? Let's go through the two metaphors. This is like 82 and 83. Very simple, right? A nerve stimulus becomes an image. I mean, that's what's actually happening, just physiologically, right? You're not actually seeing something out there. There's a nerve stimulus that's being produced in your brain that's forming an image that you call your perception. You're looking at it. That's what's happening, okay? A nerve stimulus forms an image. To that image, you attach a word. And then the next crucial step that we'll get to in just a second is that the word instantly becomes a concept. But let's hang on to that for a moment. These are two metaphors. How are they metaphors? What does it mean to call them metaphors? What does it mean to say, here's a metaphor? The nerve stimulus translated into an image.
Something which is fundamentally not the other.
Okay, good. I mean, that's
in the place of the other.
Right. In other words, it's for Nietzsche's version of metaphor, this is not a question of a similarity being drawn between old age and evening, right? What is that expression? Old age is the evening of life. It is a question of what he calls, this is the quote, a stammering translation into a completely foreign language. Right? Nerve stimulus becomes image. What's the connection between those two things? Nothing. Image becomes word. What's the connection between those two things? Well, we've already gone over that with Saussure. Nothing. Right? Arbitrary and conventional. Same thing. Arbitrary and conventional. So these formation of metaphors. Now, of course, all of this is happening as a precondition for your consciousness. Right? It's not like you're forming metaphors. It is you that are formed by metaphors. Right? This for Nietzsche, this movement is fundamental to thinking as a human in the first place, right? It's not work that you're doing, it's not figures that you're imposing. The very act of perception is doing it. So, the crucial moment though, well these are all crucial moments, every moment's crucial. We're wasting time, eternal return, blah blah blah. Is that he'll say, the word instantly becomes a concept. And we can think of this as the intrinsic relation of the signifier and signified. What does it mean to say it instantly becomes a concept? Why does a word instantly become a concept? I see this thing, I say the word cup. How does that instantly, what does it mean to say that instantly becomes a concept?
It has to fit other cases of cup.
Good. Okay? The moment that word cup is formed, it has to fit countless other more or less similar types of cases. In its immediacy, it is also and simultaneously generalizing. It is not, the word is not simply supposed to serve as a reminder of the absolutely unique perception of that individual instant at that moment. It is to generalize that unique perception into a series of categories that will fit other things. In other words, it will allow one to treat as basically the same that which is merely similar. Or, in still other words, it allows you to erase differences. This is the formation of concepts on 83. Every word instantly becomes a concept insofar as it is not supposed to serve as a reminder of the unique and entirely individual original experience to which it owes its origin. But rather, a word becomes a concept insofar as it simultaneously has to fit countless more or less similar cases, which means, purely and simply, cases which are never equal, and thus altogether unequal. Every concept arises from the equation of unequal things. Explain that to me. There's a leaf. A bunch of them. See, I mean, even take it very simply. Like when I say that's a leaf, what I'm doing is not referring to the actual. There's a leaf right outside the window. So I'm not hallucinating here. But if you could see it, it would be fascinating. But when you say it's a leaf, you're not just pointing to the individual moment there. You're saying that is of a class of other kinds of things. It is one instance of this pre-existing set of things, right? So the moment I say leaf, I'm already referring to the pre-existing set. That's how a word instantly becomes a concept. I'm already generating the idea of a pre-existing set by naming that one thing. That there are a bunch of other leaf-like things that are more or less similar to that thing. And I'm saying, effectively, some attributes of that leaf matter that allow it to be called a leaf and not a car, and some attributes don't. For instance, which attributes matter in the naming of a leaf?
Green.
Does green matter?
No.
No, it could be red and still a leaf, right? I mean, that's one of the attributes that in fact is ancillary or secondary. So we treat the color of the leaf as not consequential.
It's on a tree.
It's on a tree, that seems to be important. Photosynthesizes, what's that? It falls off, so yeah, it can fall off sometimes. Whatever, I mean, it doesn't, there are certain attributes that are central to us calling that a leaf, and then there are other attributes that are not. In other words, we assign, there's nothing about the leaves that says which attributes should be important. Right? We collectively, humans, form a concept by equating unequal things. By treating as the same of a class things which are merely similar. Strictly speaking, that means we lie to ourselves as we perceive the world. So how does this come to be? The example that I give when I teach this, like as if I were to teach you this now, this is the example that I would use, you've got, this is my 3 caveman story. You got 3 cavemen walking down a cave path, and they see a saber-toothed tiger, and the saber-toothed tiger jumps down and eats one of them. And the next day, the 2 guys are walking along a different path, and they see something off in the distance, and the one guy says, in his head, he thinks, that thing is not the same thing as yesterday because this is a different path, and that's tooth is not in the same place, and the colors are a little bit different, and so I will not treat it as if it's the same thing we saw yesterday. The other guy says, that thing is definitely different than the thing we saw yesterday, but it's close enough that I'm going to run the fuck away. And what happens is that the one who is more truthful dies. Okay? And this is exactly, I mean, that's the Nietzsche point. It's like, okay, here's what this does. It has a survival value, right, of a certain kind. So the one who runs away is the one who writes the treatise on the saber-toothed tiger and its important attributes, right? And that's the one who is, in this non-moral, this is why it's called in außermoralischen, it's really like extra-moral, other than moral sense. Right? Truth and lies in an other than moral sense. In other words, it's not a moral judgment that one is lying. The point here is that this guy, the one who died, is the more truthful. The one who lies is the one who lives, and is therefore the one who comes up with the theory of attributes of saber-toothed tigers and generates the truth of saber-toothed tigers. Okay, so on the one hand, so what one gains from this is survival, right? I mean, we get that. What else is gained from?
Efficiency.
What do you mean?
Being able to move on to the next thing, like so you don't have to pay attention to every.
Good, you're able to ignore a lot of stuff. A lot of the details become irrelevant because it's like, okay, leave, handle it. Right? I don't have to deal with the absolutely individual thing all of the time. And more importantly than efficiency, the larger issue there is just order. Right? It orders things. It allows you to encounter things without having to deal with every individual impression. You get to form generalities. Ah, you all are people. I sort of know how to deal with those. Well, in that case I don't. But one might actually know how to deal with those kinds of entities. Like in other words, that I speak words to you or something like that. That you're not, like, I don't have to figure out every time what it is that I do when I encounter a new person. It's like, I just use my stereotypes with people. and so that's the sense of, like, yes, it makes action in the world much more efficient, and it makes the world much more orderly. Things make sense. Is this a good thing for Nietzsche? Is this a good quality? Trick question. Okay, what's the difference relative to this of rational man and intuitive man? We'll call it rat man and into man. I mean, here's your storyline. What's the difference? I mean, you know, the essay does end with there are two kinds of people. There's the kind of people that divide people into two kinds of people, and then there's two kinds of people. There's rational man and there's intuitive man. What's the difference between them, right? Because one of the things that's formed by this is the concept of I. Right? That's one of the accretions that occurs, which is why you wake up in the morning and you're not like, whoa, what the fuck is this? You know, this is the David Byrne moment, right? This is not my beautiful house. This is not my beautiful wife. I mean, it's like none of this makes sense. Yeah, you're pretty much the same person that went to sleep last night. You do that by, again, erasing difference and saying certain similarities are sufficient enough. And then you like read something that you wrote 10 years ago and you're like, wow, I really wasn't that person. I have no idea who that person was and they're completely foreign for me. But yeah, to a certain extent, they're both going through this process. That's what it means to be human. But there's a sense in which, for Nietzsche, rational man seems to believe in the results or trust in the validity of the results that emerge out of this. And what emerges out of this is order. It is the columbarium of concepts. You know what columbarium? That's the word that he uses in here. So there's giant those giant buildings where it have like little slots for each burial site, and you got like thousands of crypts in there. That's a Roman columbarium. So he said, you know, what's really interesting to Nietzsche about this is precisely that humans are able to build up these conceptual edifices. Right? These incredibly intricate concept systems, right? That are based on what? Nothing. Metaphor.
Spiderwebs.
Spiderwebs, right? The delicate material of spiderwebs. And this will say, this is man's genius, right? This is what's incredible about man, is that man is an artistically creating being. Not because he writes poems or because he sings songs, but because of how he lives. Right? This is always the moment where it's like you teach this to undergrads, and you're like, so you don't have to be a fucking poet in order to be creative. In fact, poetry is the really easy road to creativity. You want to do the hard road? Make a world. Like, that's what this is doing. Right? So yeah, humanity is an artistically creative being in the way that it uses metaphor to construct an edifice of concepts that this one believes in and this one plays with. Intuitive man's like, why is it in that order? Why not